A very good evening from Queensland to everyone. My name is Nektarios Karonikas. Today, in my capacity as the Development Courses Coordinator of the Queensland branch of the Human Factors and Ergonomics Society of Australia, I want to welcome you in this second session with research bite from Queensland-based researchers. Today, our session features 4 presentations. 3 will be live and 1 will be a pre-recorded one because our friend was not able to make it. Actually, she's living in the UK. As usual, please mute yourselves unless it's time to, ask any questions to our presenters. The presentation will last 10 to 12 minutes. We're going to afford 2-3 minutes after each presentation in case you have questions, and then we're going to move to the next one. So it's time to hand over to Ritwik. Ritwik, you can start sharing your screen.
Sure. And you see that now?
Yes, all good.
All right, so hello everyone. My name is Ritwik. I'm a PhD student. My background is in psychology and I'm at the Centre for Accident Research and Road Safety here in Brisbane in Queensland. And I'm researching whether intention sharing in semi-automated vehicles can be helpful to drivers. So I got this idea of researching this topic when I was lucky enough to have a go in a Tesla and try out its autopilot feature. And of course, in general, it works well as long as you're aware of the limitations, at least in my opinion. But I couldn't help but think that there were certain situations where I felt, ooh, I don't know what this car is going to do, and it made me a bit nervous. And one example would be if I was, driving on this on a road on a motorway, and I saw a bend in the road ahead with a big crash barrier to the side, or even a cliff to the side, and we'll be going at high speeds, maybe 100 or 120 kilometers per hour. And I was hoping, and I was just, sitting in the driver's seat, and hoping that the steering wheel is going to turn in time. And of course, the steering wheel did turn in time, but I thought, well, wouldn't it be helpful if there was a visual human interface that also would be sharing the intention of the vehicle, so that I knew before the fact where my car is actually going ahead of time, and that way I would be less anxious every time there's like a potential for danger coming up ahead, like a sheer cliff or just a sharp bend in the road. But also it would help me anticipate when the vehicle is perhaps misinterpreting the road or making errors, so I can intervene ahead of time rather than have to rely on quick reactions when it might be too late. So that was the idea behind my research project. And as I started thinking more about it, I started having ideas of what that interface would look like. I wanted it to be some kind of augmented reality head-up display that would share the intention of the pathway to the driver of the vehicle. And some of the research questions that I've been working on include how can we improve trust in automated vehicles, and to what extent is the predictability of automated vehicles important for trust. So this is an image from BMW, and this is actually used for navigation purposes, but I thought something similar could be developed to communicate to drivers of automated vehicles as to where the vehicle is intending to go. And my research is building on the technology acceptance model, or TAM. But I'm also looking at other psychological other psychological constructs as well, such as mental workload and stress and situational awareness. And this is all connecting to the technology acceptance model, including trust, perceived usefulness, perceived ease of use, and attitudes towards using AVs and behavioral intention to use AVs. And I do this through a mixed methods methodology. I've already conducted two qualitative studies. The first one being an expert panel interview where I identified a number of experts that could share their views on what the ideal interface could look like, including people from optometry to law to engineering to psychology. The following study was a focus group with members of the public, and I got them to draw and discuss what they would like to see in a visual interface for automated vehicles. I'm currently collecting data for an online experiment that is testing these designs in an experimental fashion. And I'm also currently preparing to run a simulator study in January and February that will test the interface in a more high fidelity setting. So the first study with the expert panel involved me showing this video of regular driving, but then with my interface overlaid onto it, and I got some feedback on what the ideal design should be. The main results from that was that drivers should have autonomy about when it can be on or off and on the amount of assistance. So there was general support for this type of interface, but there was a common, it was commonly repeated that, depending on who the individual is that is using it, they should be able to have some say in how much assistance they want and whether they want to use it or not in any given point of time, so that it's not forced onto the user, but rather it's there and when they need it, it is customizable. And another big suggestion from the experts was to complement the shared intended pathway with object recognition, so that there would be some kind of interface that lets the user know not only where the vehicle is intending to go in terms of area, but also something saying that it's indicating or it's identifying different road users. The next study was a focus group. It had 34 members of the public, and it was a 90-minute session. It included a presentation, a quiz, and some, like a verbal discussion, and also with drawings. So there was a lot of data collected from that. And we had drawings like this that really went into detail about what they wanted from the interface. And the main findings from that study was that there should be some consideration for color vision deficiencies. Again, they also believe that there should be some object recognition, and also they believe that drivers or users should be able to customize the interface so that it's not overwhelming for some users, and nor is it too simple for other users. There should be that ability to change the settings and have as much assistance as required. Right now, I'm running an online Qualtrics experiment. I've already collected data from over 500 participants, but it's I've yet to begin analysis of that. It involves a photo experiment and a video experiment. So the photo experiment of study 2 was a 2x2 study, and there were 2 independent variables. I showed them photos of certain driving situations, and in 2 cases I've shown an appropriate maneuver, and in this case, as you can see, this green highlights that the vehicle is accelerating directly into the parked vehicle, so that's not ideal. And also, these 2 pictures contained object recognition, so I've highlighted the different road users in the road, and this one is excluding any object recognition. And I looked at their timed reaction to whether intervention was required, and also asked them questions on trust, predictability, and TAM measures. Study 2 also had the video experiment component. This time there are 3 independent variables, no HMI, HMI1, so again, only the pathway, and HMI2, pathway with object recognition. And this time, the dependent variables were situational awareness, stress, trust, predictability, and TAM measures. So there was a video running of driving, and it was randomized which condition each participant would see each video in, and one would contain both the pathway and the object recognition, another would contain just the pathway, and this third one would contain no HMI. And again, I asked them questions relating to the TAM measures and these measures in particular as well, like stress, trust, predictability, and situational awareness. I'm yet to analyze the results, the data from that, so I can't report yet what the findings have been from this study. And I'm currently developing study 3, which will be a simulator study in January and February. So that's it, folks. That's my research project in a nutshell. Thank you very much for your attention and for listening.
Thank you very much, Ritwik. Very interesting. Do we have any questions for Ritwik? You can use your microphone, or you can use your chat, whatever you prefer. I have a question, Ritwik. What is your hypothesis, if you have any?
Yeah, so my hypotheses are that the HMI is indeed helpful for these drivers or supervisors of automated vehicles, that they will have enhanced trust in the vehicle. So you say enhanced and not higher trust, because where the HMI exposes a mistake, there should be lower trust, and where the HMI shows correct performance, then it should increase the trust. So it should be a more calibrated trust.
Okay. And is this intended pathway already a feature in any automated vehicle?
I'm sorry?
The intended pathway, is it a feature already in automated vehicles or not?
That's a great question. When I came up with the idea, I hadn't seen it anywhere, but if we look at some of the mock-ups of what Waymo are doing, it appears that there is an intended pathway, but it seems to be more linked to the navigational intention rather than the exact maneuvering intention. And it's not in a sort of augmented reality, it's more in a separate monitor. So that's the closest thing I found, but there's no very specific thing that I found other than sort of things that are not designed for the end user. There are things that some interfaces that engineers use, and it has something like that. So I feel like it could be easily designed for
Okay, very nice. Do we have anybody from our guests that would like to ask? I don't see anything coming. Thank you very much, Ritwik. I wish you all the best with your next phases.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much for organizing this and having me.
You're welcome. So now I'm going to share with you the presentation that our friend from the UK shared with us. Or is it here? Can you see my screen?
Yep.
Okay, great.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Rachael Wynne. I'll start by extending my apologies for being unable to deliver this presentation in person. I am currently working as a research fellow at the University of Southampton, and this week is my final sprint to try and get some data collected before we go into our lockdown. I'm here today to present some of the research that I did for my PhD. I did my PhD at the Centre for Human Factors and Socio-Technical Systems at the University of the Sunshine Coast. My larger PhD research was based on assessing the reliability and validity of driver research methods, and then using those methods to understand learner-driver visual attention and how that changed over time. And part of that involved me looking at situation awareness of learner drivers, and that's what I'm going to talk about today. My PhD was supervised by members of the Centre for Human Factors and Socio-Technical System, but also members of the university or staff of the University of Otago. So that's why you can see there's a lot of affiliations associated with this presentation. So a very quick background to the thesis. So we know, as I'm sure you're all aware, road traffic injuries are a significant problem within the community or society. It was the 8th leading cause of death according to the World Health Organization in 2016, and it was predicted at that point that it would become the 7th leading cause of death worldwide by 2030. If we consider people aged under 30, however, it is the leading cause of death worldwide. And that falls into the young driver category, captures a lot of the young driver category in that. In addition to the substantial loss of life, though, we see up to 50 million people per year hospitalised as a result of road accidents or road crashes, and the injuries that come from those 50 million people being hospitalised have a significant flow-on effect in the community. So in terms of the healthcare and the prolonged healthcare that they may require, but also then impacting their ability to, say, return to work following the accident and the flow-on effect to other members of their household. So it's not just the person who's involved in the accident that we're hoping that we see impacted, and we hope that we can then benefit them and the families of these people also in some way by improving the road safety network. When looking at the cause, though, of road traffic accidents, we see driver inattention as being a leading cause of that. In a survey done in 2013, it was found that of accidents where you could attribute a cause, almost 50% of them were able to be attributed to driver inattention. So a cognitive failure on some part is what led to these accidents, or incidents, I should say. When we consider why this might happen, we can think back to schema and the perceptual cycle model. So a schema is a cognitive shortcut that we use to help us interpret the world and use less cognitive resources to interpret the world, as there's many aspects of stimuli that could be capturing our attention. And so we use these schema to assist us in processing what's going on around us. The perceptual cycle model shows how our schema can be modified by our experiences, but also then how our schema directs our exploration of the environment and plays a part in what aspects of the environment we actually attend to. So according to the perceptual cycle model, we would have a schema for an intersection, and that is our knowledge of the environment. It then directs how we explore the intersection when we encounter it, how we interpret stimuli at that intersection, what we look for as well when we approach an intersection. What we're looking for and how we expect to explore an environment then influences how we actually do interact with that environment, which then modifies the schema that we have. So it's this vicious cycle of biased exploration of the environment, confirming how we then interact with the environment, and we'll do that again and again and again. What's interesting, though, about this is it takes experience in order to develop these schema and also then apply those schema in the future. An overlooked area of research is learner drivers and how they learn to the environment. A lot of research is done on differences between novice and experienced drivers, and so they do scan the roadway differently, as the perceptual cycle model would anticipate. Novice drivers tend to look straight ahead, focus with a rounded directional focus. Experienced drivers consider more of the sides of the road, so create an elliptical shape. If we consider that, only the experienced drivers would identify that there is a pedestrian on the side of the road, just because they're creating more of those side sweeping movements. As I said before, learner drivers are an overlooked area of research, and they're just not given the same level of attention as novice and experienced drivers. And I was really interested in how learner drivers give us the perfect example of how we can see how they're acquiring skills over time and that sort of evolution of schema while learning to drive. So as background for those of you outside of Queensland, we require our learner drivers to complete 100 hours of supervised practice in a logbook over the time that they spend learning to drive. So I used that as the measure for when I got my learner drivers to come in and participate in my study. I had early learner drivers, so less than 15 logbook hours, middle between 40 to 60, and late being those that had more than 90 hours of their accrued logbook hours. They came in. Some people missed time 2 but came back for time 3. I then had them watch a series of videos which were of road scenes, so filmed from the perspective of a driver of a car travelling along a roadway. There were 5 different roadways that we looked at: motorway, hinterland, suburban, urban and city. And they were from 2 different locations, so looking at local roadways, but also then what we deemed to be unfamiliar roadways, and we used Dunedin as that particular location. So none of our participants had experience driving in New Zealand, and none of them had actually even been to Dunedin, so they wouldn't have been familiar with these roadways explicitly. And they were chosen because they matched the Sunshine Coast in enough of a way that it wasn't obvious that it was a completely different country, but they were also somewhat different enough that you could recognise that they weren't Sunshine Coast locations. So they viewed different videos at each time point that they came in, and I was looking also at how they scanned the roadway. I'm not going to go into that in more detail, but that was kind of the focus of this, was to see how they changed the way that they scanned the roadway over time and if that improved or changed. These are just some stills of the different locations. So they would watch a video. We asked them to look around as if they were driving the vehicle themselves, and they engaged in a verbal protocol, so talking about what it was that they were thinking while driving and describing what was happening in the clips. So using the verbal protocol as a measure of situation awareness, I transcribed all of their verbal protocols while viewing each video and ran those transcriptions through Leximancer to develop networks for each road type and each time point. And using then AGNA to run some analyses on it, it was clear that there was a change over time in the networks. So we saw an improvement in situation awareness over time. The networks became more detailed. So there was an increase in density and a decrease in diameter. So that shows that the networks themselves became more rich and detailed. And there was also an increase in the number of constructs that they identified from time 3 compared to time 1. So as they were gaining more driving experience, they were able to capture or show that there were more areas of the road scene that were of importance to them. Then looking at changes over road type. So at time 1, there wasn't too much of a difference in the road types. And it wasn't until we got to the final session that you could see a real difference in the road type in terms of their situation awareness. So I focused more on the time 3 road type differences. And it was clear that there were more constructs in the city and urban roadways than compared to the motorway and hinterland. And that's reflective of those road environments. So there's less going on, you can say, in the motorway and hinterland. And so they just weren't identifying, it wasn't capturing as much of their cognitive load, essentially. Whereas the city and urban roadways had more things going on. There were other cars around, there were pedestrians, more things that could be considered a risk, I suppose, to them. And they were directing more of their attention to those areas. So some conclusions that I have from this, we did see some increase in their situation awareness, but a significant implication though was, or significant limitation was that there was only 100 hours for them to be monitored over. And is that enough? We wondered. So in terms of driver training, you know, there's a large debate going as to if 100 hours is enough for driver training, but if you're thinking about a change and an improvement in situation awareness and how much of the road environment they're actually able to capture, that's, you know, just going to add to this debate. It also then highlighted the diversity of the road type. So there's an implication there for driver training of, you know, do we make sure that our road users are actually exposed to a wide variety of road types while they're learning to drive? Currently in Queensland, there's no need or requirement to have a variety of road types in your driver training. It's just simply about the hours. So just something to consider, and an interesting area of research that I then would like to pursue is the idea of different road types and how we're better able to prepare them for learner drivers. What I also would like to do is compare the situation awareness of novice and experienced drivers. And so as part of this research project, I actually did collect data from novice and experienced drivers. I just haven't had the opportunity to analyse it in the same way and to see how vastly different the situation awareness networks are of the learner drivers. But ultimately, as I said, we did see some increase in their situation awareness, and we did see stark contrasts in the diversity of the road types. Yeah. So that's all I have, a very quick presentation. If you do have any questions, please feel free to email me. My email address is there. And thank you very much for listening to my presentation. And once again, apologies that I can't be here.
So, thanks very much to Rachel for making the time to record this presentation. I also have another email address. I'm going to put it in the chat box if anyone wants to get in touch with Rachel. I'm sorry I cannot take any questions because it's not my presentation, but please feel free to drop a line to Rachel. So our next presenter for tonight is Ameer Alhusuny, if I'm not too wrong, from the University of Queensland. Ameer, you can start sharing your screen. And he's going to talk about neck shoulder problems, visual symptoms of the headaches among surgeons performing minimally invasive surgeries.
Hi, everyone. This is Ameer. I'm a PhD candidate at the University of Queensland. These are the slides of my thesis, and this thesis already submitted for examination. My PhD was under supervision of Vinorina Johnson, Margaret Cook, Akram Khalil, and the title of my thesis is the relationships of neck and shoulder problems, visual symptoms, and headaches among surgeons performing MIS. There has been a significant increase in the minimally invasive surgeries, which included 2D and 3D laparoscopic surgeries and robotic surgeries over the last 2 decades in Australia and worldwide. These type of surgeries are not without challenges. So there are a number of challenges to surgeons. Some of these challenges are individual, related to surgeon, and some of them related to the environment of operating theater, operating table, monitor position, and the awkward posture adopted by surgeons during surgery. So the thesis was to fill a gap about the relationship between neck shoulder problems, visual symptoms, and headaches among surgeons performing 2D and 3D laparoscopic surgeries and robotic surgeries. And the rationale of this study was there are shared risk factors underlying neck shoulder problems, visual symptoms, and headache. And there are concurrent mechanisms for developing of these symptoms among MIS surgeons. So the objectives of this research were to document the prevalence and severity for neck shoulder problems and visual symptoms among surgeons, to identify evidence for the relationship of neck shoulder problems, visual symptoms, and headache, to document the risk factors for developing neck shoulder problems, visual symptoms, and headaches among MIS surgeons, to clarify the associations between neck shoulder problems, visual symptoms, and headaches, and to determine the effect of visual impairments on perceived symptoms, muscle fatigue, and surgical performance among surgeons performing surgical simulated tasks in the 2D and 3D viewing mode. So we conducted the first study, which was a scoping review study to document the prevalence of neck shoulder problems and visual symptoms. And the main findings of this study were there was a great variability in the reported prevalence of neck shoulder problems and visual symptoms among surgeons. Neck shoulder problems and visual symptoms shared several risk factors, and the relationship between the neck shoulder problems and visual symptoms has not been fully investigated. This study is already published in the Journal of Surgical Research. And then we conducted an online study to find the association between different risk factors with the development of neck shoulder problems and visual symptoms, and as well as the association between these symptoms. And we used checkbox to run that online survey, which includes 63 items, asking about surgeons' individual characteristics, surgery-related factors, operating theater environment and setup, surgeons' response to ergonomic challenges. We use computer vision syndrome questionnaire to assess the prevalence and severity of 15 different visual symptoms. And we use Nordic questionnaire to assess neck shoulder problems, as well as a standardized questionnaire to assess headaches. 2 studies raised from that online survey. The first study was to find the association between neck shoulder problems and visual symptoms. And the main findings of this study were neck shoulder problems, visual symptoms, and combined symptoms were reported by 31 and 29, 15, and 5% respectively. Neck shoulder problems significantly associated with all the visual symptoms. Several risk factors significantly associated with neck shoulder problems, visual symptoms, and combined symptoms. There's a potential link between neck shoulder problems and visual symptoms. This study was submitted to the International Archives of Occupational and Environmental Health, and revision to the, and already we are working on the revision to the reviewers' comments. The second study from the online survey talking about the headaches among surgeons. And the main findings of this study were 1/3 of MIS surgeons reported headaches, and almost 1/3 of that headaches were severe. The prevalence and severity of headache were significantly associated with the visual symptoms and neck shoulder problems. Forward head movement significantly associated with the prevalence and severity of headache. And the reported characteristic of headaches are suggestive of tension type headache and cervicogenic headache rather than migraine. The manuscript of this study is already published in the Journal of the Surgeon. And then we conducted a laboratory study to find the effect of visual impairments on perceived symptoms, muscle fatigue, and surgical performance. And in that laboratory study, we assessed visual functions such as accommodation and convergence by the use of the Royal Air Force ruler, RAF ruler. And also we assessed stereo acuity by use of the random stereo test. We asked surgeons to perform 4 standardized tasks, surgical tasks on 2D, 3D viewing modes. And then we assessed the perceived symptoms by using of visual analog scales. And we assessed muscle fatigue by using of service EMG. And we use the median frequency as a parameter. And then we measure mental overload by NASA TLX. And we measure surgical performance by standardized tools. 2 studies raised from that laboratory study. The first study talking about find the relationship between the visual impairments and perceived symptoms as well as surgical performance. We found that surgeons with mild accommodation convergence dysfunction and/or good stereo acuity tended to have more intense physical symptoms such as headache, dizziness, visual symptoms, and simulator sickness, but the performance scores for these simulated tasks were better than those with moderate accommodation, convergence, dysfunction, and or poor stereoacuity. The manuscript of this study is already submitted to the surgical endoscopy, and the revision to the reviewer comments already submitted. The second manuscript from the laboratory study was about the relationship between visual impairment and muscle fatigue. And the main findings were there were significant differences in the level of muscle fatigue of the neck shoulder muscles with the severity of visual impairments, muscle side task, and surgical performance. And there's a relationship between the degree of visual impairments and muscle fatigue of the neck shoulder muscles among MIS surgeons. And this manuscript is ready to submit. In conclusion of this thesis, we conclude that, neck shoulder problems, visual symptoms, and headaches among MIS surgeons were significantly associated and shared several risk factors. Visual impairments were correlated with the development of perceived symptoms and neck shoulder muscle fatigue. Surgical performance correlates with visual function, which may provide a route toward quality improvement that has not previously been considered. As implications for this study, lighting and temperature of the operating theater have been identified as risk factors for physical symptoms during surgery and should be added to the published ergonomic guidelines. Surgeon responses to the ergonomic challenges during MIS were by adopting awkward postures. Therefore, ergonomic training program about the awareness of these awkward postures may be more effective to prevent physical symptoms. The relationships between neck shoulder problems, visual symptoms, and headaches may be due to visual impairments. Therefore, regular screening of visual acuity, stereoacuity, and visual therapy of surgeons may assist in mitigating the negative impact on physical symptoms and improve surgical performance. Recommendation for future research. Firstly, objective measurements of physical ergonomics challenges during surgery. Experimental studies are required to confirm and quantify the deviation of surgeons' posture during surgery. Future studies are required to compare risk factors of physical symptoms during surgery among symptomatic and healthy groups. Real-time surgery assessment of the visual function and muscle activity during MIS or during surgery is crucial. Qualitative studies are crucial to assess surgeons' awareness of physical ergonomics challenges. Future studies should attempt to recruit from a variety of surgical specialty to strengthen the generalizability of this finding. And thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Ameer.
Thank you.
Lots of findings there. I mean, that was a huge study.
Thank you.
I would like to ask any of our guests if we have questions for our friend Ameer. Anyone from our panel here? Galaxy, I don't know who is the Galaxy, wants to talk.
Sorry, that's Marina here. Sorry.
Hello, Marina.
I had to find another phone. I had trouble getting on tonight. Actually, Ameer, really interesting findings. I suppose I wasn't sure if I caught it, but what was the exposure time like? Did you look at the amount of time that these surgeons were doing their theatre list? Was there any correlation between that with their symptoms?
You mean in my study or in general?
Oh, in your study. So.
In my study, the whole time for the laboratory study was 2 hours. But these 2 hours, we use it the first hour to measure the visual function and some of the paper tests, and then we ask surgeon to do the simulated surgical task 30 minutes on 2D monitor and another 30 minutes on 3D monitor. So the total time of the exposure was 1 hour.
1 hour, okay. That's very interesting that it was only 1 hour and they already displaying those symptoms, so that's really interesting.
Yes, thank you, you're right. So as we know that surgeons working more than an average more than 5 hours a day, and an average more than 1 hour and a half for one surgery. So I think the symptoms may be more intense during the real-time surgery.
And did you play with the setup as far as the monitors? Just thinking about the visual side of it. Did you look at the layout?
Yeah, we try our best to make our lab similar to the laboratories, to the real-time surgery. But the problem whatever we do during surgery, it's more complicated, and the stress level is more because they are doing real surgery, and they have to put in their mind the patient safety and the successful surgery. The other limitation was in our study, the monitor in our laboratory study was perpendicular to the surgeon posture or surgeon eyes, while in the real-time surgery there's an angle. So the main surgeon and the assistant surgeon viewing the surgical field from one monitor. So, and that monitor is not the angle between there's an angle between the surgeon's eyes and the monitor. So it's not 90 degrees. And we think that this is one of the important factors that future studies they have to put in their mind.
Yeah, cool. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
I have a question. I mean, because we're talking about medical professionals as participants, and you're measuring postures and visual symptoms and all those things, how do they perceive the results? Did you communicate with them, those findings? Were they aware about possible connections between the visual symptoms and, the rest of your findings?
You mean with my participants?
Yes, participants, yeah.
For the laboratory study or for the
the lab study, for the lab study.
So for the lab study, we measure visual function before the exposure, before we ask the surgeon to do the simulated
operation.
Yeah. And then we just compare their performance and whether their visual impairments affect on their performance. And we found that the surgeons with better visual function, their performance is better, but they just experienced more symptoms.
More symptoms. So okay.
Yep.
That's yeah.
Yeah, actually, the explanation for that, I think it will be long here to just explain it here. But we talk about the explanation for these findings in our papers. So
okay.
Yeah, in case of publication, it will be good time just to
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Very interesting.
Thank you.
Okay, so we have our last speaker, presenter for tonight. So I want to welcome Haroun Zerguine from the University of Queensland, who's going to talk about the benefits and barriers in using and implementing sit-stand workstations, very popular and trendy this period. So Haroun, please.
Thanks, Nectarius. Just checking that you can see my screen. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Yep, lovely. Thanks so much, Nectarius, and thanks for organizing this session. So what I would like to do today is sharing with you some of the findings from my PhD project on exploring the use and uptake of sit-stand workstations in Australian workplaces. So to start with some backgrounds, our life became more sedentary, and some statistics from the Australian Bureau of Statistics in 2018 showed that more than almost half of the Australian adults described their day mostly sitting. And studies showed that office workers sit over 11 hours per day and more than 7 hours at the workplace. And research showed now that sitting for more than 30 minutes without mini breaks or sitting all day at work is likely to affect our health. So prolonged sitting or sitting for these long periods of time is likely to develop musculoskeletal discomforts, cardiovascular disease, obesity, type 2 diabetes, mental disorders such as depression, and all cause of mortality. So through all these causes, so Safe Work Australia has developed this sedentary work or acknowledged sedentary work as an emergent work health and safety issue. So experts developed a guide for workers and recommended for workers to progress initially to accumulate 2 hours per sitting, standing, and live activity, progressing to a total accumulation of 4 hours per workday. And one of the best successful strategies to achieve that is using the sit-stand workstation or height adjustable desks. So these desks showed to be effective in reducing sitting time and offering that posture variation during the day. And some of the benefits that have been shown in research is a reduction in musculoskeletal discomforts, especially in the lower back, improvement of cardiometabolic parameters, improvement in general well-being, and improvement in work satisfaction. So all these without impacting productivity. So since all these findings have emerged, so workplaces start implementing sit-stand workstation in their workplaces. And today, most of the studies that have been conducted is getting the user's experience, but it is important to get from the decision makers' perspective or those individuals who purchase sit-stand workstation in workplace. So what is the implementation process of these units? And what is the current usage by employees? Are there any guidelines, policies, and training programs to support the use of these units? What are the benefits from those organizations who have implemented them? And what are there any challenges that workplaces face when implementing these workstations? And will there be any future strategies to enhance the use of sit-stand workstations? So to answer these questions, we conducted an online survey and in-depth interviews, and we targeted those individuals who have some roles in purchasing furniture decision makers in organizations. So these individuals usually include managers, head of department or divisions, or health and safety individuals. So we recruited participants through similar networks, and we achieved 270 participants in the survey. More than half of them were male, and 62% of them classified themselves as team leaders or middle management. This is usually included safety and health coordinator, head of departments or units, and 38% were senior management or executives. This is usually include directors or business owners or for small industries or general managers. So we got participation from over 200 organizations across Australia, distributed all over states, across states in Australia. And half of the organizations were public, 40% were private. And we got a good representation from organizations size, from small to very large, and across all 19 industry sectors based on the ABS classification. And 70% of these workplaces reported that they already implemented some health and some wellness programs for their employees at the workplace. And in terms of the sit-stand workstations, so 81% reported that they have provided at least one of their employees with the sit-stand workstations, which will be the focus of this presentation in here. So these organizations, the 216 organizations that they have, that they provided sit-stand workstations. So they either provided electronic sit-stand workstation or tabletop very desks. So these two types dominated in workplaces. And 40% of them provided sit-stand workstation for employees who requested them, 28% only for workers with a medical injury or medical history. So in regards to the reasons for implementing sit-stand workstations, 34% of organizations implemented this sit-stand workstation to reduce musculoskeletal discomforts and injuries, followed by improving health and well-being and increasing employee satisfaction. The surprising thing here is 70% of organizations have reported that they are not monitoring the use of sit-stand workstations since they implemented it. And half of them don't provide any training on the appropriate use of sit-stand workstations. And almost 80% don't use any strategies to support the use of sit-stand workstation in their workplaces. So we conducted some interviews with a subsample of participants who undertake our survey, And we tried to get a good representation from all industry sectors or from organization size, public and private organizations, and across states of Australia. And most of participants, or all participants, have an experience in their role between 10 and 35 years. So the first thing that we talk about in the interviews is the current practices on sit-stand workstations. So participants here reported that employees often receive a basic demonstration on how to use the sit-stand workstations based on the manufacturer manual. So there is no further training provided for employees. So in terms of the benefits of sit-stand workstation, two themes that come up. So sit-stand workstation promoted the posture variation and decreased injury complaints. So after implementing sit-stand workstation, participants, many of them referred that they received less complaints, musculoskeletal complaints from employees. And they feel like employees breathe better, more opened up, more enlarged, and work better. And which some of them reported that an increase of from their employees. The second theme that comes up is employees feeling rewarded and valued. So one of the points that participants described is employees feeling valued and noticed when they provide with sit-stand workstation, which increases employee satisfaction at work. So if you go to the barriers on the use of sit-stand workstation, 4 themes that come up. So the first thing is design limitation of certain types of sit-stand workstation. So these limitations were basically only for organizations that have implemented manual sit-stand workstation or desks, which is the top that comes on top of the actual desks. So these two types showed to have some limitation, either in terms of height, some have height restrictions, or losing certain amount of desk space when standing up, or the manual was considered as a labor intensive and workers don't use it. The second thing, one of the main things, is participants from different organizations reported that there is a lack of guidelines and evidences from trusted sources, either in terms of the actual guidelines, how to implement the sit-stand workstation, or either in terms of best practices and how to promote the use of sit-stand workstations. Some of them reported that there is some difficulties and they don't have enough resources on how to measure, on how to promote the benefits without any evidence of how to measure the benefits of sit-stand workstation in workplaces. Another barrier that came up is the individual physical well-being and lack of knowledge. So here participants, many of them gave the example of employees with current injury or a discomfort. So these employees showed to use the sit-stand workstation more often, comparing to other workers without discomforts that they don't see the value of it or the direct benefit to them. And here, workers highlighted the need for a more education program and raising awareness for workers to break in that sitting habit among employees. So other practical issues in the workplace, this is, as an example, was the anti-fatigue mat that was reported underused. And some of them reported loss of privacy in certain office arrangements when standing up. So when asked about future strategies and what workplaces need to help them through the implementation and use of sit-stand workstations, so education programs are the key to encouraging the use of sit-stand workstations. So participants highlighted that the need of education program around the good practice and good posture and health in general for their employees, and highlighted removing that authoritarian approach or language and imposing rules on employees when to sit or when to stand, and just raising awareness of workers. And when asked about how these programs should be delivered or the most suitable way is a technology-based training. So the second point that we found out is the importance of ongoing monitoring and employees' feedback after implementation of sit-stand workstations. Here employees highlighted that there is a need for more to continue monitoring and measuring sit-stand workstation after implementation. So this will inform them on the current use of sit-stand workstation and inform them for future purchasing of sit-stand workstations. So direct implications from these studies found that organizations want and need an evidence-based guidelines for safe use of sit-stand workstations, and organizations want an effective strategies to support the use of sit-stand workstations, and organizations want some methods to measure the impact of sit-stand workstation, either in terms of health outcome or work outcome, such as work satisfaction or productivity. So our next step in this project is we are aiming to develop an evidence-based e-learning module on the use of sit-stand workstation, and as well to support workplaces on the implementation process of sit-stand workstation and the uptake of these units. And so the current work that I presented just now will be hopefully submitted for publications in the coming days. And we are analyzing the data for a second study from the same method, from the survey and interviews, where we are comparing the perspective from organizations that use sit-stand workstations and organizations that didn't implement sit-stand workstation in their workplaces. This is hopefully to be submitted early next year. And thank you.
Thank you very much, Haroun. Lots of work ahead with the sit-stand workstations.
Yeah.
Okay, do we have any questions from our friends online?
Yeah, Donna asking about the 24% types of sit-stand workstation reported. So some of them reported that there is the moving sit-stand workstation, the sit-stand workstation with the wheel that they use it. And we offered some options for sit-stand workstation, the manual and then the post-stand workstation. Yeah, mainly these are the two types that comes up in there.
Okay. I have a question, Haroun. Because, I have heard of many initiatives about the sit-stand workstations.
Yeah.
Are they currently in use as a proactive or a reactive method after people develop, MSDs or other health problems? Because my understanding is that more reactive than trying to promote,
Interesting, yeah, is interesting. And this is what we actually found, that workplaces, when I conducted with them interviews, most of them, they implemented them to reduce musculoskeletal discomfort. So there were some requests from employees, and there were an increased rate in those employees who reporting some injuries and discomfort. So they implemented them as a reactive approach, which is interesting. Like previous studies, they promoted the sit-stand workstation as a strategy to reduce sitting time, but workplace taking it in another approach, which is a reactive approach to reduce their musculoskeletal discomfort.
Yeah, I was afraid so. Okay, thanks for your answer.
Yeah.
Okay, I see we don't have any other question. Please join me to thank our friends who presented Ritwik, Rachael, Ameer, and Haroun. Thanks everyone for coming and joining us in this evening.
Yeah, just one more question, Margaret just asked it. Many people now working at home, how is that impacting? Yeah, it's really interesting because there are some that I found some articles even from companies that they sell sit-stand workstation. They reported an increase in selling sit-stand workstation. So individuals are more aware of getting sit-stand workstation even at home. So what we will consider in developing the e-learning module to be addressed to individuals as well, that they are using it from home.
That's a nice idea.
Yeah.
So good night to everyone, and thank you very much for coming.
Thanks, everyone.